The center of Hurricane George is right over eastern Cuba at this hour. When and where it moves back over water is going to make all the difference. Welcome to Weather Center. I'm Mike Bono. We also have the first frost advisories of the year in parts of New England. Details on that are just minutes away, but first we go to Bob Stokes in the Forecast Center for the latest on George.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Residents of southern Florida are bracing for Hurricane George. It's still over the eastern tip of Cuba. However, the path takes it close to Florida. Of course, we'll have to wait and see as to the exact path over the next few hours when it goes over water. It's perilously close over water now, and that bodes well for further strengthening. Our current coordinates shape up this way: 19.8 north, 75.1 west. That centers at 530 miles to the southeast of Miami with winds of 75 miles per hour. As you recall, this used to be a Category 4 hurricane at the top of the line of the Category 4 status. Right now, a Category 1, moving toward the west-northwest at 14 miles per hour with an estimated pressure of 995 millibars. And we do have hurricane warnings in effect for many locales from eastern Cuba to Haiti, central Bahamas, southeastern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands. A hurricane warning means that hurricane conditions are expected over the next 24 hours. And you can see that extends to Cuba, the eastern half of Cuba about. And hurricane watches for South Florida, northwestern Bahamas, and west central Cuba. And you can see the area outlined in bright orange. That's where the hurricane watches are in effect. And bear in mind, a watch means that hurricane conditions are possible over the next 36 hours, and that includes the greater Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. And we also have tropical storm warnings in effect for Jamaica, as well as the Cayman-Brac Islands and Little Cayman, and please bear that in mind. With us is our tropical expert, Jeanne Hope. And John, it appears like further strengthening is imminent.
Well, I'm not sure how imminent, but once it gets over water, I think it will be. It's very close to water now. The center is over land, and as long as the center remains over the eastern portion of Cuba, it's not going to strengthen. But just as soon as it gets out over the water, I think we have the dynamics in the atmosphere are such that it will strengthen.
Okay, but it looks like the possibilities or the probability of it making waterfall, if you will, moving back over water is pretty high. And then you said that perhaps it could even go as far as the Gulf of Mexico, ultimately, if it stays on its projected path.
We're not sure about that exactly this far ahead, but we do expect it to go into the Florida Straits, and yes, it could very well go into the Gulf of Mexico.
All right. Speaking of the projected path, let's take a look at the strike probability. These areas outlined in red, and that it does include southern Florida. Can you give your thoughts on the projected strike probability?
Yes, indeed, Bob. The red here on the probability shows you where the high probability is, and as you can see here, it goes over the Florida Keys, just west of Florida. Now, the official forecast track is kind of up the middle of all that, but of course it could be a little bit on either side. We can't really pinpoint it any closer than that this far ahead. But certainly it's going to be very, very close to South Florida and the Keys, if not right over that.
Okay, as you know, evacuations have already begun in the southern part and the central part of the Florida Keys.
From the Keys, yes.
That's right. And we were showing you the strike probability, or the strike possibilities, probabilities. Here's a look at the big picture. Of course, Florida right here. There's a look at Hurricane George. And what do you make of it on this big picture here? Do you see any upper level influences that may impact George one way or the other?
Well, we're watching the upper level flow very carefully. We have a ridge of high pressure which has been very persistent up here, kind of a narrow ridge, but it's still there. And that's helping keep it down pretty far south on a west-northwest course. And then to the west of that, we have an upper low, and the upper low has got a tendency to make it come a little bit more towards the north.
Okay, John, we've got some pictures out of Homestead, Florida. Evacuations, as we were discussing, have begun. The evacuation specifically of the Florida Keys is well underway this evening. US 1 was jammed just about the entire day. Tourists were asked to leave yesterday, and today residents of the lower Keys were ordered out. They were mandatory evacuations. In Miami, business owners were boarding up in anticipation of George after the devastation brought by Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Residents of South Florida aren't taking any chances with a George, nor should they. And as we take a look at the wind field around the center of George, we find them so.
Well, we have the yellow shows you where the tropical storm force winds are. They extend well over the Bahamas. The Great Inagua, even at 2 o'clock this afternoon, they had tropical storm force winds, and we've had a number of reports from eastern Cuba. The winds are tropical storm force. Haven't had any hurricane winds reported. Those are confined now to just a small area near the center.
Now, there's been some dispute, or at least some discussion, about exactly where that center is. Could you care to talk about that?
Well, it's always a little difficult when it's not clearly defined, but you can see where the dark area is on the last frame, and clearly it's over the eastern tip of Cuba. It appears, Bob, to be a little bit closer to the north coast than we thought it was earlier, and that does raise the possibility of the center being able to get over water a little bit earlier.
Right.
The official forecast from the Hurricane Center kept the center of circulation over land for the next 24 hours. There's some possibility anyway it could get out over the water a little bit earlier, and that would allow this hurricane the opportunity anyway to get a bit stronger before it does get to South Florida.
Right, it's not an assured thing because it could always jog a little toward the west and stay inland, I suppose.
Right.
But the way it looks, it seems to be on a more of a northwesterly than a westerly
Well,
path.
we have to watch that very carefully. Over the next few hours might be kind of critical in that respect to see just exactly what it does do.
Okay, and here's southern Florida right here. And could you outline for us again as we take a look at this, the probabilities, the path, if you would?
Well, the most likely path, we think, is across the northern part of Cuba here and then off just maybe slightly west of Florida. But it could be a fair amount either side of that, you understand.
Well, it looks like one thing, if you had to place money, that it would probably strengthen over the next 24 hours.
Well, over 24 hours, I think the first part of your 24-hour period probably will not strengthen very much.
Okay.
But if it gets out over the water, say, by morning, then it could begin to strengthen at that point.
So you're looking at, if it does go out over water, it would be toward morning time.
Oh, I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, of course, the history of George has been a destructive one and even a deadly one. And let's take you now to Hispaniola, where George is considerably weaker than it was when it made landfall on the island of Hispaniola yesterday. Of course, it's weaker now. But as we take a look at the winds, you can see they were blowing quite hard across Santiago, the capital of Hispaniola. And if we can go to that video, if not, well, we're not. But it was quite destructive. And John, hopefully it'll not strengthen, but we never know. It looks like it's going over water. We'll be joining you a little bit later. Thanks so much. And if you want to join us online on our computer, the web page is www.weather.com. And for the latest on the U.S. weather, let's go back to the studio with Mike Bono.
Thanks a lot, Bob. Yes, folks are shouting the praises of autumn today, the first day of fall, especially folks that have been sweating it out. Still sweating it out in parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, but much cooler weather coming on in to the northeast and the Great Lakes and moving on down south. Of course, here is imposing George, even a greatly reduced minimal hurricane showing a very well defined pattern of isobars around it, and it probably will get worse before it gets better. We're looking at another cool front, a bubble of high pressure threatening to come on down from Canada and reinforce some of the cool air, but ahead of it some unsettled weather, some disturbed weather with some showers up in parts of North Dakota and even on into Minnesota where there could be
station or newspaper. George continues on its destructive path, heading toward the Florida coast. Make sure you're tuned to the Weather Channel for the latest updates on the hour and half hour.
Man's basic desire is to be free.
He will break loose his chains. He will decimate his enemies.
From director Steven Spielberg, a shattering drama comes into your home on pay-per-view. Morgan Freeman, Anthony Hopkins, Jaimin Hansu, and Matthew McConaughey. Sheer power. Amistad. One of the most powerful films of the year. Easy to order at home on pay-per-view.
Mrs. G's, your one-stop for TVs and electronics.
How do we do it?
By offering you the best TVs and electronics at the best prices. Now's the time to save big. Every TV in Mrs. G's huge inventory is on sale. All brands like Sony, Hitachi, Zenith, Toshiba, JVC, and more.
The big deals are at Mrs. G's.
1 block south of the junction of 295 and 95 on Route 1 in Lawrenceville.
Every night we find a little more out about how the weather works and how it's going to turn out tomorrow. And that's what we bring to the viewers. It's the mystery of weather.
Right now, it's your local forecast on the Weather Channel.
It's time for Storm Watch, which is sponsored by Home Depot. And we began with the tropical update, and we start off with a big picture look. And boy, is it a busy day today across much of the Atlantic and Caribbean region. We've got, of course, our Hurricane George that we're monitoring here. And there are three other systems in addition to George that we're watching. Tropical depression here, just east of Bermuda. Another Hurricane Ivan, and here our third hurricane. This is Jeanne. We'll have an update on all three systems in addition to Hurricane George. Here's the latest advisory as of 8 o'clock this evening. If you're tracking the storm, there are the latest coordinates. It's about 495 miles southeast of Miami, and winds right now minimal hurricane strength, 75 miles an hour in terms of wind speed. George is moving over Cuba and has weakened a little bit during the day today as a result of being mainly over land. It is moving west-northwest at 14 miles per hour, and that motion is expected to continue for the next 24 hours. Now, an assortment of hurricane watches and warnings out. Warnings right now currently for a large portion of Cuba, throughout portions of the Bahamas as well. Still warnings, hurricane warnings for Haiti, and already watches are being posted for parts of South Florida, the northwestern Bahamas, and west central sections of Cuba, as the hurricane is expected to maintain this west-northwesterly direction. We could see the tropical storm hurricane conditions begin to develop in South Florida within the next 36 to 48 hours. And the next 24 hours are going to be very critical in terms of where this hurricane goes. It's over land, so it's very difficult to precisely pinpoint where it's located. We do believe that the center of the hurricane is right about here, still over land, but it's nearing water. And once it gets out over water, the atmospheric conditions are very favorable to see some strengthening. So depending on which direction this hurricane continues to go for the next 24 hours, will have a large impact on how strong it is and where it emerges, and therefore how it might affect the United States, which is obviously a huge concern. Right now, the current probabilities are greatest that it may impact the Florida Keys, South Florida. The air is shaded in red, but obviously wherever you see the yellow or orange, there's a potential there for some impact as well. And again, where it goes in the next 24 hours is going to better define for us how it will impact the United States. Tropical Depression 11 east of the Bermuda region, winds at 35 miles per hour. We've seen some gusts around 39 miles per hour. It's moving away, should not be a problem. Hurricane Ivan moving off toward the north, barely a hurricane, also should not be much of a concern. And lastly, Hurricane Jeanne here with winds of 90 miles an hour moving off toward the east. We'll have a complete update on George and its impact coming up.
Stay with the Weather Channel for up-to-the-minute coverage of Hurricane George with live reports as Florida gets ready, coming up on Weather Center after your local forecast.
This program was sponsored by the Home Depot.
As a customer, you're so important to us that you should have the best price all the time rather than just sometimes when other stores think it's convenient for you.
Home Depot doesn't have sales because we have an everyday low price.
The competitors have to have the sales because they jack their prices up so high, but we keep our prices low every day.
You would be